Hey everybody, today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/eggs show. Audible has more than 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, pretty much any device you can imagine you can get an audiobook on. As Eggs listeners, you can download a free audiobook today by visiting audibletrial.com/eggs show. Again, that's audibletrial.com/eggs show for your free audio book.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. Today's guest is a highly anticipated one. After only 10 short hours in the car, we arrived on the steps of Blind, a Santa Monica, California-based brand strategy design consultancy, where we're meeting our special guest, Chris Do. Chris is an Emmy Award-winning designer and CEO of Blind, in addition to having founded The Futur, an online educational platform focused on the business of design. Outside of his work, Chris serves as an advisor to numerous organizations, including AIGA LA and the Emmy's Motion and Title Design Peer Group, in addition to having taught sequential design at the prestigious Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. This chat has been more than a month in the making, so without any further ado, let's get the show on the road. Live from Santa Monica, California, meet our guest, Chris Do.
All right.
Thank you so much for making the time. Really, we appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I just want to clarify with everybody that's listening, when you say special guest, it's not like I wrote in on the special bus.
Well, it was pretty short. I mean, I don't know. No judgment here.
Yeah.
So just before we get into the show, so we were introduced via email from our friend Jason Frostholm out at the Creative South podcast.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a good friend of ours. Actually, he was the reason we started doing a show at all. We went out to Creative South a couple years ago and did a podcast from my hotel room at midnight with him, and that sort of spurred everything. And so big shout out to those guys out at Creative South, and thanks so much for that. I guess from there, let's just roll into this thing. So for people who don't know, Chris, can you give us a little background on who you are, where you're from, that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, I am the founder and CEO of two companies. One is called Blind, and that's a brand design consultancy. And the other company, which I'm really excited about, which is called The Futur, and it's a content and education platform. We try to teach creatives and to empower them in regards to the business aspects of life so that they can live a fulfilled and sustainable life as a creative human being.
Yeah, we've, for anybody who's been following the show in the last couple of weeks, we had a couple of fellas on from The Futur.
Mm-hmm.
So we went pretty deep on what they do. It's a really cool platform. They talk about a lot of things, not just design. I mean, you get into, logo design, typography, things like that. But they also cover a lot of just the basics, how to scale an agency, some other things like that are helpful for
practical,
people in
common sense
for
stuff
folks that are in the
people
creative business.
Yeah.
And so it's a really cool platform, and I think it's got a lot of potential. And it's kind of interesting how we've landed on. We've had more than one company that's doing educational platforms. And so one of the questions that we often ask has to do with sort of the future of education or traditional education. So Chris not only attended, but eventually went on to teach at the Art Center in Pasadena, which is a pretty prestigious art school, really well known out here especially, but I mean nationwide, worldwide, some of the best went to that school. Can you talk a little bit about just sort of your education, your pathway to sort of getting to launching Blind, or maybe that's too far down the road even, but just sort of your upbringing and how you got into the business?
Sure. I think my path towards becoming a graphic designer was more out of happenstance and circumstance rather than one of deliberate intention. I don't know, but I guess I was never exposed to illustration or entertainment design or many other things that you can ultimately do with your creativity. Graphic design seemed to be the most realistic thing that was in front of me. And I've shared the story before, but it was only through meeting an actual living, breathing human being who did graphic design as a living, who was able to provide for his family.
Weren't you able to? You were working for a screen printer
Yes.
at one point, and you walked into this guy's house and saw what
That's
an
right.
actual studio was like. And you're like, oh, this is me. I like this.
Yes. And it wasn't just that the studio was the set dressing for the dream. It was really the man who was doing these things on a computer and assembling shapes and type and putting them together in an interesting and aesthetic way that really, before then, I didn't know that that's something that you can do. The closest person that I could think of prior to that point in time was somebody who was working at the fairgrounds, airbrushing your name or doing a caricature on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I would stand there for not hours, but long periods of time just watching them and how they're able to control the line work. If they're doing lettering, it was just beautiful stuff. But I knew that they weren't making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that didn't seem like the life that I wanted to live.
You didn't want to be a carny?
No, I didn't want to work out under the sun,
Yeah.
Working for relatively low dollars. And so I just put off that dream. So I think the idea of becoming a graphic designer was just one of exposure. And that's why we work so hard at doing what we do, because there are a lot of young people out there and not so young people, maybe second career people or career switchers who
That's actually me.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's pursued one thing because they were told that's the thing you should do for your life. And then later on realize there's this itch that they can't scratch. And what is it? So we try to give form to that. And so there are a lot of times the creative people come to our show at a live event and say, can I get help with convincing my parents? I say, you tell your mom and dad to call me.
Okay.
And I will do the best pitch job that I can to them.
You'll actually take phone calls from parents.
Personally, I will do it because somebody did that for me.
That's awesome.
And I want to do that for everybody that needs that. So I say, if you're concerned about money, if you're concerned about the career path, whatever it is, what is possible, tell them to come and visit the studio. I'll give them a tour personally, or I'll answer their questions. I'll talk about numbers. I'll talk about whatever it is, because I believe in this, is that we need to listen to our heart's desire and to follow that. And not just to like dream about it, but to actually put in the work and time and energy necessary to achieve your dream. Life is just too short otherwise.
Yeah. So coming from being a professor at college to starting an online learning platform, where do you see the future of education in the next few years? Do you still see like the traditional I'm going to college, or do you see the online approach taking off more?
Okay, that's a complicated question. And I generally don't like to look back too much. I like to look forward. But in this one instance, I'd like to look back. And I want to say, if you're talking about going to a private art school, the tuition, at least in the United States, is quite high.
Yeah.
It is actually very high. And currently, I think to go to Art Center, it's above $20,000 per semester.
Wow.
So when you talk about 8 semesters of that, not
that adds
including
up quick.
living expenses, supplies, and everything else that goes into you doing that thing, it can add up. And then you have to wonder, on the opposite end is when you graduate, are there enough high-paying jobs that after taxes that you can actually pay down that debt so that you're not underneath a student loan for the rest of your life? That's question number 1. So it's a question of finances and value. Question number 2 is the material they're teaching at school the most relevant information you need to survive today? And we know that large institutions move very slowly. So when a thing has happened and it's peaked, that's when they've noticed it and it started to integrate it into their curriculum. And it's not realistic to expect them to be able to move much faster than that.
Because they have to build the curriculum to begin with.
That's right.
Then,
first, they have to recognize it.
Yeah.
Then they have to kind of plan the curriculum and then hire the teachers who they think can teach it and to find them and then slowly shift the paradigm or whatever that's happening at school. And we saw this with motion design, with interactive design. It's always a couple of years behind what's happening in the industry. So that's a problem. Problem number 3 here, what kind of teachers are you going to be able to recruit? So we know that really active, busy, successful professionals don't have the time to teach. 1, they just can't manage it given their workload. And 2, where's the desire to do it for them? I mean, we know that time is the most precious thing that you have. So why would they take out half of their day to work on assignments and design things from the ground up, only to teach and be paid a very small amount of money and then go back to work again?
It's got to be a passion kind of thing. And I would assume that's kind of why you do it or did it. I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, you had a comment saying that you had a goal to, let me pull up the notes, to affect the lives of 1 billion people.
Right.
And when I read that, I was like, 18 people. That's a good goal. Change the lives of 8. Whoa, that's a B.
Hey, 18 people would still be pretty good.
And then I had to
people.
Google like how many people are on the earth. Okay, there's 7.6 billion people. You want to affect the lives of essentially 1/8 of the population of the world.
Yes.
And that's a lofty goal.
Mm-hmm. But you know where that comes from? That comes from a guy named Jason Silva. Do you know who Jason Silva is? He's a host on the Discovery Channel for a couple of things, and he's a public speaker, and he's a young, attractive guy. And he's like, in the new millennia, we're going to all be billionaires, but billionaires is not measured in the numbers of zeros in your bank account. It's measured in the amount of lives that you positively impact on planet Earth.
I love that.
So I'm also a big believer in setting like quantum like leap forwards in terms of your goal. Like if you want to take a step forward, don't take a little step.
Take a big one.
Take a really giant one. And so then all of a sudden, when you have such clear and big goals like that, you start to marshal your resources and your time and your thinking, your decisions are impacted by this now. So when I'm asked to critique one kid's portfolio, I have to ask myself, is this moving me towards my billion goal or not? And so sadly, I have to make the hard decision, say, sorry, I can't review individual requests for portfolios. However, when we ask for some portfolio submissions for our show, please submit then.
I noticed you did a bunch with skateboard decks.
That's right.
That was really a neat little. We interviewed a guy named Chris. What's his last?
Schill.
Chris Schill.
Yeah, he
owns a company called Goodside Skateboards.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going through looking at those decks, and I was like, "Oh, these are neat." There was one that was like a rain mixer for a DJ, and that kind of hits home with me. And it was just really cool to see that you A, had the challenge, and B, let your network kind of do it.
Yeah.
I was actually surprised by the response. I mean, there are thousands of those things.
There are.
And I don't know, I mean, maybe I haven't been following closely enough. Is this your first design challenge with the Futur?
No, I think this is our second official one. We've done little mini challenges within our pro community, but this is just like open out into the real world. And it's this idea that if we don't hold on to our design as such precious things that we can commit to doing something on a daily basis, we can start to retrain our brain. Now, I'm probably the first person to tell you I'm pretty amazing with Photoshop, right? And just kind of trying to be humble about it. But as I'm doing these challenges, I force myself to use different tools that I normally don't use.
The magic wand always gets me.
Right? To try to like learn something new. And then I'm discovering maybe I don't know that much about Photoshop because within all these layers and these menus, there's always a different way to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like just doing it myself, I'm growing too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point because I don't know. Like I said, I was really impressed by the response, but just the fact that you were able to get people to follow about 7 steps. They had to go buy the right template. They had to do all these things. Like, I think that really speaks to the audience that you're crafting and sort of, the type of engagement they give. So I think that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'd like to sort of pivot off of with all this education talk, though, before we get too far away from it, is we've talked to a number of different people, CEOs and things like that about this. And so I think you'd be a good one to talk to because I know that you do this in your business, mentorship and coaching and sort of the value of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of freelancers and a lot of people in the creative business who are sort of used to going it alone and doing it their own way, the idea of reaching out for help from other people, I think, is uncommon. Also for people who maybe don't go through a traditional education path where there wasn't an internship step or there wasn't some professor that influenced you or whatever. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that. And the one that really brought it up for me, and I'm sorry, I'll apologize in advance because I forget the series that this was part of, but you did some interviews with a guy named Keir McLaren.
Yep.
And I just fell in love with him from that little series of shows that you guys did.
Mm-hmm.
It was on the Futur, but it was like a little mini series
called Mastermind.
Yeah,
nice.
Mm-hmm.
And so this guy was really interesting, and you had mentioned a little bit that he had mentored you in some ways and coached you along the way. And so I wondered, just as somebody with mentors, if you could sort of speak a little bit to that.
Sure. The thing that I kind of always wished for was to have a big brother who did what I did or was in the industry that I was in to help me along the way. But that's a fantasy because those people don't really exist. Right? Or so you think. And now some of us have been blessed to meet that person who is that wise, sometimes old person who comes into their life to help them along the way, like Yoda for Luke Skywalker or Obi-Wan, somebody to really help you. But in real life, it seems a lot harder to find these people because the first thing you think of is if you're doing what I'm doing, why would you ever want to help me? Because then I become your competition.
Competition.
We know that, right? So it was just a matter of circumstances. Again, I think I'm just always at that place where good things happen because I'm in the right place and right time.
Well, and I also think it also has to do with your willingness to ask. When I was watching an interview that you did a while ago, and you were saying that you started blind in 1995,
right?
And it was your uncle that came up and approached you and said, "Hey, do you want to start a design firm?" And he was like, "All right, yeah, let's do this." And then, oh crap, I got to put a business plan together overnight. And you reached out to your college roommate whose dad was a business guy and said, "Hey, how do you do a business plan? And just the fact that you were willing to reach out to your roommate and say, hey, your dad's in business. Can I get some help? That says a lot just of your personality and the way that you operate. You figured out what you needed pre-Google and did it, which it says a lot. So,
well, if you have to be able to have this idea that somebody out there, maybe 2 people away from the person already has the answer. So I'm a big believer in trying to work smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
Now I could sit there and pound through this thing, or go to the library and check out books.
Check out a book and read it.
It's going to take too long. I think with the timeline, the deadline in which I needed to put this together was so short that I don't have that luxury. So I've always felt like, somebody out there already has the answer. And this has saved our bacon so many times. Like when we encounter a really tricky visual effects job and our team is not able to figure it out, I just ask more people. And I don't know why this doesn't occur to more people. It's like, here's the problem I'm trying to figure out. You may not have the answer, but maybe somebody who does have the answer.
Well,
and lo and behold, that happens.
We interviewed Matt and Cena a few weeks ago, and we asked him about the Coldplay video and the interactivity portion of it. He was like, well, I pitched it to him, but now I had to figure out how to do it. And he was able to network with a few other people and get the final product out. And it was just a matter of, finding the people that knew how to do what he was thinking of. And they were just so happened to be working on the platform to be able to do something like that. And I don't know. It always seems that when that opportunity comes and you start looking, the doors just kind of open and it's there. And I don't. It's always been like that for me, and I don't know why.
That's true. There's a little bit of that in my experience too. Just, anytime I'm looking for work or whatever, you just sort of put out into the universe that you're looking for work, and stuff seems to roll in. I don't know. Maybe it's just lucky coincidence, but
well, there's this thing. I think it's related to the law of attraction. Like what you think about all of a sudden coalesces within your world. For example, when I was going to give a talk about self-confidence, I'm thumbing through Time magazine, and then boom, there's an article on what is that called? It wasn't on self-confidence, but it was like how resilient you were as a human being. And I read it, I'm like, oh, this is perfect. But I wasn't looking for that article prior to that moment in time.
And it just fell in your lap.
Yeah, it's like when you're looking for a pair of jeans or whatever it is you're looking for in your life, and all of a sudden jean thing starts popping in front of your face, and you start to observe like, oh, that's a pretty fashionable person. He's wearing a really cool pair of jeans. What brand is that? And then you have that conversation.
I always just thought that was super creative retargeting.
Well, but it happens in real life too, right?
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point. And like I've always, sort of attributed it to just putting it out into the universe, but you're right. It really is more to do with your attention. You're focusing on whatever it is you're chasing down, whether it's
like when you buy a
whatever.
car and it's like a new model you hadn't seen before, and then everywhere you go, you see that car.
Exactly.
And
that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's why when I was saying earlier, it's important to have these really big, lofty goals and to have it very clear in your mind, because then that's what your mind is starting to focus in on now. So you start to change behavior. You start to perhaps change the activities that you're doing or the people that you're talking to, because it doesn't seem to line up with what that goal is going to be. But getting back to your question about mentorship, it's like running a company is very stressful, and you're trying to make really difficult decisions without a lot of knowledge or information. So there's that phrase, trial and error. And that's scary, especially when you're talking about really large jobs that are hundreds of thousands of dollars. And every mistake you make, everything that you do or don't say in the right way leads to you getting a no. And that's brutal, especially because as a creative person, you're trying to put your energy out into the world, and it's just being shut down all the time. That's when Kier enters my life and starts to change it forever. And when we say like he's a mentor, like I paid him to be my business coach, as that's the way he works, for a period of 10 years, where I met with him every single week for an hour to 2 hours every single week without fail.
So, and I guess, does that sort of coincide with the growth of Blind and all that from sort of the early days to later? Or had you tried it on your own for a little bit prior to finding a coach? And then did you notice the shift after you found somebody?
There was a giant shift. So I think we had already been in business for about 5 years at that point. And we seemed to hit some kind of ceiling, a financial glass ceiling for us. And we were doing, I think, around $2.2 million a year. And I was like, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
There's 4 of us. And
I'm
I was like raking in the cash.
Sign
right?
me up.
But just never one being content with where I'm going in life. I always want to make progress. I want to grow and change. We had a good year, and I told my wife, I think we need to just hire people to help. That was just an idea. I didn't even know what form that took. So I'm having lunch, and this guy tells me about his business coach. Of course, I just say, you mind sharing that person with me? And so then we talked. And in that very first year, we went from $2.2 million to $3.9 million. Not quite double.
Yeah, but still, that's a pretty significant jump.
It's significant.
Yeah.
It was pretty radical. And the tweaks that he made to the way I talked and the way I thought, they were relatively small, but they were significant small changes.
Well, and what I love about you, and this is kind of a recurring theme that will come across as we're talking here, but that you've then sort of paid that forward through some of the people you work with. So another Eggs Show alum, Melinda Livesey, was on the show a couple weeks ago, and she's sort of one of these people that you've done this for. You were sort of her Kier. And so, and same thing, you know, the way she described it to us was, you know, you gave her some incremental changes and some things to make, and she's dove in with both feet on those changes. And, you know, she's seeing massive results, which is really cool for her. And so, but I guess, you know, sort of back to the mentorship thing, the fact that you took that advice and acted on it. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people like me who've heard plenty of good advice come down the pipe and then never acted on it. Can you talk a bit about that? Like just that bit of the pie there, where you're actually not just getting it, you know, blasted at you, you know, Gary Vaynerchuk style, where it's just shouted in your ear, but the bit of, I guess maybe it's just discipline or something that gets you to actually sort of turn the corner and apply that advice.
Well, one thing before you do that I want to bring up is you reached out to Melinda. She didn't reach out to you. And I think that says a lot about you. Just the fact that you noticed her talent and you said hi. And I appreciate that. I think that's neat. So
people are always a little surprised that when a message comes back to them or something that it's actually me, they're like, is this really you? And I have a smart ass response to that. And I type back, is this really you? Like, how do we all know? How do we know? You just have to assume it's me because it is me and this is the way it's going. And Melinda's kind of coming into our show and our world and our life was really because she showed something and she demonstrated an ability to take a small prompt and turn it into something much bigger than that. So it became like, it really piqued my curiosity. So I looked into her website and it looked really professional. I was thinking, this is not the usual person who's like checking out her show. Like, what are you doing here? Why are you even doing this? And so I messaged her, like, jump on the phone with me. And she did. And so that's how she kind of enters our life. And at that point in time, I was looking for some young person to coach to be part of the show. And she was the best fit. Even though I had asked the internet, I didn't find the right person until I saw her work. And I'm like, I think it's you. And I had a conversation with her and she was perfect.
Was she kind of shy and introverted at first? Did she kind of have a, you know, kind of like what I have? I don't like cameras. So
well,
because it is a shift. Like we were talking a little bit pre-show about sort of the introverted nature of a lot of designers and things like that. And we don't know Melinda well, just other than our interview. So we don't really know her. She was very extroverted for us and great on the show.
Yeah.
But was she sort of naturally that way, or were you able to help her find her way? I
would not describe Melinda as an introverted person. That very first conversation I had with her, she was nervous, but nervous for different reasons. I think it was because she even told me this story. I don't know if she told it on your show. But her husband was like, this is not real. He's not going to help you. This is like an internet scam. Like, that's not even him.
Yeah.
That's talking to you right now. And she's like, well, we'll see. And there's something about her that makes for a very unique person who's going to do really well in life. One is she's curious and she's willing to try things that she has no guarantees for that will work. It could have been a complete waste of her time. It could have been one of those Nigerian internet scams. It could have been all those things, but she didn't let fear stop her. And the other thing, too, was she was afraid to talk to me because she was like, I've been seeing you, I've watched your shows, and I just can't believe you and I are talking right now. And
you reached out to her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And, you know, I think a lot of people are skeptical, and that might even be the roadblock that keeps them from moving forward. So maybe that's a learning we can pull out of there is, you know, sometimes trust, sometimes give of yourself to see, if the opportunity is in fact worth it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
watch out for the Nigerian email scam, but I mean,
Those are obvious. There are telltale signs that you should not be doing this.
Sure.
But I think what happens in our mind and fear, it gets magnified in that echo chamber in our brain, is little things get conflated in our mind and we automatically assume the worst thing is going to happen. So what do? We stick to our life, our routine, our habit, and then nothing ever changes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, when I say, if you want to get fit or you want to make more money or if you want better clients, you will need to do this. And whatever that one thing is, they resist it with all their might. And then ultimately it comes down to this: what guarantees do I have that this will work? I say, I don't have those kind of guarantees, but I will guarantee you one thing. If you change nothing, you'll have exactly what you have now. And you need to make that decision.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. It's like, if you want something you don't have, you will have to do something you've not done. That's just the bottom line. So there are people out there, and they seem to do really well with a person like me, where with little bits of information, with a little guidance or prodding, they can make radical changes. Melinda's one of them. There are several people on the internet that are like this because they tell me all the time, I used to charge 300 pounds for a logo. Now I just closed my largest thing at 3,500. That is a 10x amount. And what they haven't had any personal coaching with me at all. They've just watched the information on the internet from our channel and maybe didn't even understand the concept truly, but they at least voiced those same words or did the same thing. And it's resulted in this. And I can't tell you how many times people send me a message saying, I can't believe it worked. And my only response to that is, it worked because you believed it worked.
And you took the
That's
steps
all
necessary to make it work.
Well,
too.
once you believe
Yeah.
it's going to work, the rest will happen. The rest will manifest. Right? So if you say, if I tell my client 2 times as much as what I currently ask them for today, they'll automatically say no. So you never ask.
yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's true, not just in the creative sphere, but anywhere. Even if, God, was it? Can't remember if it was you or if it was somebody else. Actually, it might have been a Vaynerchuk thing, actually. But I think he had a suggestion or a challenge to try and overcome these things, where basically you go into stores or whatever, you go and order your coffee and you just ask for 10% off. Just give me a break.
That sounds like my dad.
I'd like a discount. And they might tell you no, they may not do anything with it, but the bravery it takes to make that ask, because it's such a out of left field thing or whatever. And, maybe some of the time you get that 10% off, and it worked out really great, but you wouldn't have got it if you hadn't asked.
Yeah.
And so, but you also had to build up some resistance to hearing no.
Yeah.
And I think that is also a characteristic that, I don't know, is falling out of favor. This idea of hearing no and accepting no from people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, maybe it just comes with maturity and age or something, or a long time in the creative field, because you ought to be beat down over the years by clients or internal, creative directors or whomever. You've got to be able to take critique and develop a thin skin or a thick skin. But I think hearing no, back to your point about fear, it really is. That's kind of the name of the game, right? That's kind of just the nugget there is fear. It's overcoming your fear, whatever you're afraid of, even if it's, I don't know, not real.
Right. Well, most of it's not real. Who is it? I think, I'm forgetting his name. Jack Canfield. He has a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul, and he has this great way of understanding fear as an acronym. And his acronym is: fear is a fantasized experience appearing real. There's so much that's in your head around no, like when you want to ask a girl out or ask for a discount or ask somebody to help you with directions or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're afraid of something that hasn't happened yet and you won't do it. And most people would describe that as insane. Like when you talk to me about purple unicorns flying around space, none of us see that. That's not real. It's not tangible. And so your fear is some kind of form of socially acceptable insanity.
Okay.
That's really what it is.
I'm concerned if the pink unicorns aren't real.
Right?
Because,
Right. Get a hold of yourself.
I'm just saying, if they're not real, then I need to see somebody.
And for your listeners, if they want to try to tackle some of their fear-based thinking, I would suggest them to look up rejection therapy. Mm-hmm. And I think the guy who made it into a game, his name is Jason Comely. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but just look up rejection therapy. It's been taken up by somebody else now in terms of carrying it forward and keeping that idea alive. But it's basically a deck of cards that asks you to do something bananas. So what you do is you just draw a card a day and you try and do that thing. So one thing that it tells you in the card would be to go to a smoothie shop and just ask for the fruit. unblended, or to go to a burger stand and ask for a burger refill. And just because you know you're going to get no, or to ask a complete stranger to loan you $100. And then what you learn over time is you build up resistance to this, to say like, it's not so scary. It's when people say no to me, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's a big thing to overcome, especially for younger people. But I mean, even at my advanced age of 38, we still, have those fears, and coming from sort of an introverted background that I did, it's pretty common for me to do exactly what you're saying, not make the ask.
Right.
And so with that in mind, and then I want to I think these sort of all go together, but I want to talk a little bit about goal setting and how you sort of, I guess, developed the skill where you were good about setting these big over the top goals, because basically you're setting aside that fear to chase down something. So I think there's kind of a relationship there. And I wonder if you could sort of explore, were you sort of always naturally able to set goals? Like, I mean, for me personally, like I'm not particularly good at this. And in fact, it's probably been a hindrance. And this is the worst part, is that I recognize it's a hindrance and I still haven't fixed it. But, a lot of folks say start with the end in mind and things like that. You've got to know where you're going in order to get there, that kind of stuff. But I think that is a skill, not something that's sort of inborn in people. Like I don't think everybody is just naturally good at setting goals or chasing down things for purposes or because of fear, like we're talking about. So I think they're sort of inextricably linked. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of just getting into the habit of setting some goals and, I guess, organizing your life or finding structure.
Mm-hmm. Let me talk about this in two parts, I think, because you kind of set it up like that. A lot of people might misinterpret as what I'm doing in terms of chasing down these dreams and having the audacity to think these big things as a sign of courage, as a reflection of like, oh, I see the fear and I just keep moving forward. And I don't think it's like that for me at all. And if I'm looking at my own life, looking backwards, here's what I think happened. My parents, as first generation immigrants to this country, were busy working, trying to assimilate into the culture. Both parents were working, so they had very little time to manage three raucous boys. And so I was kind of left to free to do whatever it is I want. And my dad has this kind of parenting style where it's more laissez-faire. Like, I'll leave you alone. I'll give you some boundaries, and then we'll talk through certain issues if you have them. But otherwise, you just need to figure things out. He's kind of a just hands-off kind of approach. And so it allowed me to dream and have stupid ideas and for people not to tell me no all my life. And I think that's the problem with our education system. And that's the problem with the way a lot of parents bring up their kids. No is the first word that comes out of your mouth. It's the last word that comes out of your mouth. And so I make a very deliberate effort when raising my two boys, I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, to make sure I don't interfere with their thinking. Like, they have crazy ideas too. And I'm like, well, that's pretty crazy, but let's explore this. I'm okay for you to try and fail. And each time you fail, I'm not going to be that parent who pounces on you like, see, I told you, you should have never done that. Because what you starts to get trained inside your brain is like, okay, try new things, be punished for it.
Well, it's like the touching the hot pan kind of scenario. Like, if you're always afraid that you're going to get burned, you're never going to try to cook. And so if you build up that fear mentality to everything you do, you're just afraid of the results. I'm kind of going through that right now with the big project I'm working on. I feel like I'm stagnant right now because I'm afraid of actually launching the product, and it's just
You're
psychological,
Every creative person I know is like that. Like, literally right now during our podcast, I have a friend who's launching a YouTube thing, and he's been bugging me all weekend and like, should I make the point size this and the color? I'm like, you're killing me here. Just release it and let it go, and then make something else tomorrow. Like, you're obsessing too much about this thing, about trying to make it perfect, and you're just annoying me right now. So stop it. Right?
Yeah.
So I know that some parents and some teachers coddle their children a little bit too much. It's happening. Like, I'm trying to protect you from making any possible mistake and getting hurt in life. Now, I know this is not a story of good parenting, but while I was looking after my young son, and he was very small at that point, I put him on a sofa, and it's a pretty deep sofa. And I'm like, you sit here. And he, of course he can't understand what I'm saying. And I put him there. I'm like, my eyes on you. And I'm doing something, eyes on you. And the next thing I know, boom, I hear this loud smack. He fell off the sofa and he started crying his head off. My wife comes running down the stairway and it's like, oh my God, I just asked you to look after him for like 1 minute. And I heard the sound of him falling from upstairs. I'm like, honey,
it was just his head. No big deal.
I'm like, he did fall on his head. No, we're not joking.
Yeah, they're bouncing babies for a reason.
Yeah, he had a big lump on his head and she's like throwing daggers at me through her eyes. But you know what? My boy never fell off another bed or crib after that. Yeah. He knew because before, every time he would fall, somebody would catch him or put him back and that was it. So I know that was a painful lesson. And I'm not saying this is good parenting, but sometimes we do need to go out into the world. We need to fail and we need to reassign what it means to fail. Fail to me is learning. Fail is trying new things. Fail is like going outside that box. And if you want to be innovative, you have to have a culture that's willing to fail. And that's the problem.
Yeah. One thing that you pointed out a few times, just over the research that I've done, as far as setting goals, you're a big fan of social contracts, and I love that. And I inadvertently do that on my own because I get these crazy ideas, and I'll go and do them. And I if I tell someone about something, I want to make it happen because they're holding me accountable for it. And I kind of would. Before I'll think about it for a week or two, and then if I tell Ryan, it's one thing, but if I tell my peers, people I work with, and just people in general, I make it a point that I stick to it because I don't want to be known as the guy that's going to say one thing and do another, and that's just my psychological craziness there.
It's not. It's not. It's much bigger than you. That our civilization, our culture has developed because of some forces greater than us individually. In Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, he talks about how we have the desire to be consistent with ourselves, meaning that if I give you my word, I'm going to do something. Like my word is my bond. We've all heard that. A man is only as good as his word. Put your hand on the Bible and swear you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Like you're not a hole in the ground is not going to open up and swallow you if you tell a lie. But we've pledged to people. We hold these same ideas to be true. The reason why social contracts work, and just to understand this, look at it from a wedding perspective. Like when you put on a ring and you go through the ceremony under the eyes of God or whatever, and you promise to be there for your partner forever, it's really that you've invited the people that matter the most to you, your parents, your siblings, your cousin, your uncle, aunts, your friends from work, your coworkers, whatever. And you promise each and every one of those people in front of them that I'm going to cherish and honor this person for the rest of my life. That's why social contracts work. So the stronger your network of family and community, the more likely it is that you're going to be consistent with the things that you say. So the best way to make sure you do something or don't abandon it is to tell as many people that you care about, I'm going to do this thing by this time. Now let's get into goals. Okay? Yeah. Goals need to be SMART. And SMART is an acronym, and there's a couple of ways of looking at it. SMART is specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. So that's a lot to remember. The three that you really need to remember is it needs to be specific and measurable and time-bound, meaning you have to have a period of time in which this can be done. So don't say like, I will be an astronaut. I will be an astronaut in 4 years. And then you can then get into what it means, right? So if I'm going to grow my company, that's not a specific goal. It's not bound by time. So this is really important. The clearer something is in your mind, the more you'll be able to kind of be able to break it down and take steps towards achieving it. So anytime you want to set a goal, like what is your goal for like 1 year from now? If I'm talking to you, Ryan, 1 year from now, what is it that you have accomplished that's going to make you really happy?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know. I mean, financial security is part of it. Creative outlet, making sure I'm doing the things that sort of appeal to me creatively. And having the opportunity to do that without the binds or being worried about the finances bit.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of security, but it's also a little bit of, I guess, personal itch scratching, making sure that, satisfaction exists.
Perfect. You answered that exactly where I wanted you to, and I'm going to ask all of you. Maybe. I'm going to ask all of you, if you're listening to this, was he specific? Were those measurable goals? Was that bound by time? Yes, it was bound by time because I say 1 year from now.
But they were pretty vague.
They're very vague.
Yeah.
So if we were to drill into this a little deeper, what does financial security mean to you?
Right.
And is this something that you can realistically accomplish in 1 year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, really, for me, it's just a matter of covering the bills and being able to sort of do the things I want to do without sweating the finances. So, again, that's pretty vague, but I mean...
So without giving away anything that you don't want to give away on air, how much money are we talking about?
I don't know. Let's say sub 10K. a month.
10K a month. Okay. So let's say, just for round numbers,
Yeah, just for easy
120K
math.
a year.
Yeah.
That's easy, right?
Yep.
Okay. So as long as you hit that baseline, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Perfect. That's very specific now. So you know now that you need to do something that's going to earn you 10K a month. Now, 10K a month could come from one client, or you can have 2 clients that pay you 5K, or 10 clients that pay you 1K. Which one of those seems to be the most realistic to you?
The most realistic in terms of what I've got is these 10 that pay 1K a piece.
Okay.
I think what I would aspire to is something more like either 2 for 5 or 1 for 10.
Okay, so that should be then the goal. We should transition from doing 10 projects at 1K, because that's a lot to manage in a month, to maybe doing 2 projects that are at 5K. So then all you have to do is ask yourself, what kind of clients buy what kind of work at 5K or more, right? And then you start to focus in. So this is the way I work. Everything that I want to accomplish in life, I just take a big thing and just keep chopping it down. It's called chunking until it becomes like a bite-sized piece. Once it becomes a bite-sized piece, I'm going to marshal all my energy and resources into thinking, what can I do to attract this kind of work or this kind of goal in my life? And then it becomes a lot easier. But if you were to sit back and say, I want financial security, which is how we started, it becomes like this amorphous, like, well, what does it even mean?
What does that mean?
Because my definition of financial security and yours, Mike, is very different. Each one of us has a very different goal. Some kid in a third world country or developing country could say 10K would be my annual
and looking
goal.
for it and be happy about it.
It would be through the moon.
Yeah.
And I know people in countries where that's like a lot of money.
I noticed you were going to the Philippines soon.
Yeah.
I lived there for 2 years. I was in San Marlete area, and it's amazing the type of amazing people that live there and what they don't have and what they're happy about having in their life. Just a TV for the neighborhood that all the kids can hang around the house and watch through the windows. That's a big deal to them. And, it's amazing how just the different outlooks on, what we need versus what we have to have in our lives too.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the thing that makes all of this stuff really important is that the goal is personal to you and what it is that you want to accomplish. And it doesn't really matter for somebody
anyone else. Yeah.
It could be to graduate and get a master's degree, whatever that means to them. And then the other part you said was creative outlet, which is probably the beast that's very hard to figure out.
Yeah.
How do we measure that? Like, how do we define that? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, it's hard to say. We talked a little bit pre-show about just sort of, I've been a lifelong designer. I've always done design. But I mean, I have a laundry list of 30 little inventions or ideas or app concepts or whatever that would be awesome to pursue. I'd love to chase those things down. But there, quite a few of those things are a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. I'm a designer, not an inventor. Not to say I've marketed products like this for my own clients. So, I'm capable of doing the work. But it's sort of a new challenge and it's a little bit scary, So this creative outlet might be launching this new service that I'm interested or trying to chase down. But I guess part of what's steering my thought process right now, and maybe this is something that other folks can sort of relate to, is there's a bit of practicality in that I've got a couple kids, I got a house payment, I got a car payment, I got to cover that stuff. So, and that's, I guess, sort of why, as I gave you sort of the couple things, it's not one thing I'm chasing. It's there's this piece, but once that piece is sort of handled, then I think I can take the time to look at the rest.
Sure.
And maybe it's not good to compartmentalize that way, but that's sort of how I address it. But maybe that's also making it difficult to chase down, Right.
So the way that you can look at this, and it sounds like a difficult thing to get our heads wrapped around, but I just look at it as then units of time. Let's assume then you can work a 40-hour week, which would probably be wonderful, right?
Yeah, God, that would be a break.
That means that you can spend time with your wife and your kids and you're not burnt out and dad's good on the weekends and all that kind of stuff, right? So if we say of the 40 hours, 30 of which can only be spent on doing paying work and 10 of which need to be dedicated towards developing these creative projects that you have kind of on the back burner. And so what you need to do is say now, how can I find 2 clients that will pay me $5,000
for those 10 hours of work?
For those 30 hours.
For the 30 hours of work a week.
Yeah.
And you can do it. So then you have to start to make some decisions in your life. See, so the clearer the goal is and the clearer it becomes in your mind, the easier it is to make decisions as, am I moving in the right path or not?
So that seems, I guess that's
would that be good for you?
Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic.
Right? 40 hours a week. 10 of which you get to do whatever you want. So if you want to read a book, if you want to dork around with your app or whatever it is you want to do, you get to do. That's just your time. If you just want to sit in a hammock and sip lemonade, that's fine too.
Oof, I couldn't imagine.
So the 30, right?
Yeah.
So you can actually do this.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, your goal is not that hard.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know, I mean,
100%.
it's funny because when I say something, I mean, of course, we were just kind of throwing out numbers, but like 120K wouldn't get me a crappy apartment here in Santa Monica, so I mean, obviously you have to aim a little higher than that depending on your,
no, it would,
circumstance
but yes,
or whatever, but
yes.
for purpose of or the sort of sake of argument, breaking it down that way, I mean, makes it very clear, it's, I mean, back to that idea of starting with the end in mind, right? I mean, you've got to have some concept of where you're going. And as you can tell by my first response, obviously I'm up here in ambiguity land. And so even just this little exercise, was super helpful just to think of it in sort of this way. I think a lot of people, and, I can only speak from my own experience. I speak in wheeze, so I don't feel bad, but I really mean me. As I was exiting my last situation and moving back into sort of full-time working for myself and running my company and transitioning my business from traditional freelance kind of operation into an agency type life, one of the things I started doing was, trying to study up on sales and study up on some things like this, because as we mentioned, I'm sort of naturally introverted. I'm not generally dying to go do sales. I mean, I've been blessed so far in my career that almost everything has come by referral or word of mouth. And I suppose that's probably pretty typical. But if, it's not a great way to scale, it's not a great way to, really grow a company because it's kind of slow and trickles in and, you've got to be a little bit more assertive, I guess, and actually go chase some of these ideas. And so as I've been doing this and watching some of these videos and, I've fallen into the same trap as a lot of people, watch a lot of YouTube and a lot of the, the aforementioned Gary Vaynerchuk's and the guys like that. And it's all hustle and grit and work hard and all that stuff, which at its core is fine, but it's not very actionable. Just to hear go work hard, I mean, kind of doesn't mean anything. And even with, chunking it down like this, I think, as we continue to drill, we might get to some action steps. And, so I guess that's probably the point you're making is as you chop it down into smaller and smaller bits, it's much easier to say, okay, I'm making 3 phone calls today. Like, maybe I'll get all no's, maybe one client will say yes, or maybe I'll get a meeting or whatever. But doing those 3 things is a achievable something versus, the ambiguous, we're not calling anybody or, we just want for whatever the situation is, we want for things to improve, but we don't actually want to do anything new. And so
sometimes that's the case. But before you even get into that place where it gets drilled into, oh, I need to make X number of calls and all that kind of stuff, I like to think about it a little differently. And I agree with you. There's a lot of motivational speakers out there that'll fire you up, and then you run out the door and you're like, now what?
Go walk across some hot coals.
And you have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
You have no idea. So let's talk about this. I think in the world of design today, that you being able to find 2 projects to do that you can realistically complete in 120 hours of work a month, I think that's a very realistic goal. So what I want you to do is just now for a moment to think about what kind of clients need work that isn't too labor intensive that would pay you $5,000 to do that. Is there something that you can think of, like what is hot right now? Like what are people paying for? Where the minimum is $5K and it could be much more than that. What do you think that would be?
It seems like there's a lot of room in digital marketing, social media, that kind of space. SEO. There's a lot of room in SEO. I think one of the paths, and I'm a little biased or influenced by some other things and other people we've talked to, but is this idea of consultative relationships with clients, helping actually develop the brand strategy, where they may do the work in-house or whoever's doing the work is sort of irrelevant, but you're taking that bit that, at least as a freelancer, you do for free and start asking for it. So I think that, there's something probably in that consultative space that's a little bit more valuable, probably a little less labor intensive, as you mentioned, because it's a lot more to do with your skill set and the things you've learned over the years and stuff than it is about actually working.
Now, I want to make a point because everybody can't see us right now, or
Sure.
maybe they can with the video that we're recording, but I want to point out something. Like what's happening in your mind right now when I ask you that question? You see, because now we have variables to think about. You're sitting here thinking, what can I do that's going to be less than 120 hours a month that's going to pay me above this rate? And so it's filtering out a lot of things. So like when you say SEO sounds like a lot of labor work to me. It really is. It's like crawling through every image, renaming it, tagging it properly, going back in, and it's a grind.
Metadata,
And the amount of money you pay for that, relatively speaking, is low because there's a lot of people who can do that. So we're going to want to eliminate some of these things. So now we're searching in our mind for something where it's not a lot of labor, but it pays really high.
Yeah, and it's funny that I didn't even mention design, which is like the one trade
thing that you
actually
do.
have. But I just happen to know that trade doesn't. I mean, it pays well, but there's kind of a cap. I mean, eventually you'll sort of cap out. And
I don't know the industry. That I come from a completely different background, but what I know about you is you're an excellent illustrator. Like you can draw and you can create caricatures and you can do all this different stuff. And you're kind of working with a guy right now doing some projects with that. And I think. Personally, I think that's a good skill set that you could monopolize.
I think sort of to Chris's point, that's pretty labor intensive.
I honestly don't know, right? And I'm just throwing that out there.
It's why I've got 4 kids' books that aren't done yet. I wrote 2. I got 2. I wrote 2. I got 2 published, but I've got like 4 others that are just like, ugh.
Right. So anything that you have to physically do, like draw, design, and make things, it's going to be fairly labor intensive.
Okay.
That's not to say that it's bad because you can make a lot of money doing that.
Now, one thing that you're good at and that I've noticed is you use your employees to your advantage to get the product to the end to where you're only doing 10% of the work, but you're getting 90% of it done and you're just saying, all right, do this, and we're good. Is that kind of the right where you're... Okay,
well, we'll talk about that a little bit. You're talking about management and delegation, but before I lose the sense here that I'm chasing down is this. It's interesting to me that you didn't say this. What if I found a sponsor that paid us $5,000 a month so I could just do the podcast stuff? And if you found 2 sponsors to pay you that $5,000 a month, and that would solve all your problems.
So how do you go from being, okay, we're getting decent plays. How do you go to a sponsor and say, all right, we got this really cool thing we're doing, and I think our product's good. I think we do a pretty good job at putting out a good quality product. How do you get them interested in something that's up and coming?
Okay. Like I said, before we drill into the actionable, like this is what you're going to do now, I just want to open up the thinking.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So the first thing.
Trust me, I've thought about this.
So we needed to have a clear goal, which we have one now. Okay. And we're tying that to a number of hours that we can work a week. The less, the better. Sure. Right. That's obviously everybody's goal, to work the least amount of hours to get to pay the most amount of money. That's a fantastic thing if you can do that.
Sure.
So I noticed something. The first thing is you quietly edit out design and illustration, all the kind of labor stuff, because it's a lot of work. So then you started to look at the things that you may or may not be doing today. So it's the grass is greener complex, right? Digital marketing, SEO, to be a consultant, strategy.
A little bit vague in their own.
That's fine.
Rights.
That's fine. So, but that seems kind of cool, and people are doing it and seem to make that kind of money. And then what we didn't explore yet are other kinds of ways of making money, whether it be passive income. So you might want to make like a 4-column grid where each one is like, what is it, the skill set that I have today? What are skills that I'd like to acquire? What are things that are just blue sky? And what is like passive income? And just write things down so you can sit there and systematically attack this so that I never dive too deep into like, what's the action plan until I know, I've looked at the landscape. I kind of figured out what works and what doesn't work, what seems most likely based on the opportunities and my personal skill set, and then the smallest gap from me where I am to where I want to be. Once I figure that out, then I'm going to go deep. But this is indicative of design. Let me replay this conversation so that it doesn't get too meta for everybody. What happens typically when a client approaches you and says, I need you to design a logo. What do? Like, great, I'm off to the races. And they go really deep, really fast. So they start exploring colors and forms, and they start to fall in love with their own work. So the thing that I try and teach creative people, it doesn't matter if you're a musician or a compositor or a graphic designer, is spend more time thinking about things, gain clarity, and make sure you're being very objective and you're looking at the whole picture, and leave the work part to the very end. You see, like how many times did I have to say, stop, guys, stop. Mm-hmm. Let's not dive into the tactical steps, A, B, C, and D yet, because we're so quick to like, oh, let's go, squirrel, let's go.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to rein you guys back.
Well, and it's funny because, I mean, to your exact point, so what if, we didn't even talk about sponsorship before that, but like, of course we've had conversations. Oh, it's time to monetize. We've got enough traffic. We've got enough episodes, things are going good. Let's monetize. what does monetize mean? And we've done some very bare bones stuff. We've got some referral sponsors and stuff, and they're great, but
we've thought about buying a van and getting people to sponsor the van and the wrap and all that stuff. But
but you really need volume for that kind of stuff to work, and we have people, but we're no Joe Rogan, we're, and so I think in order to sort of make these like referral type clients work, it's a volume game.
Mm-hmm.
And so
we're about to do some deep mindset work here right now.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay. I don't know.
This is perfect, because the thing is, a lot of people just want to take what's in front of them, and that's okay. But if we said to ourselves, we need to become so attractive that sponsors are willing to commit $5,000 a month to us, what do we have to become for those people to be interested in us?
Yeah.
This is the path towards learning, becoming a life learner. So the first thing that you do is like, okay, currently we don't have the numbers to warrant that. So you start exploring things. And most people try to solve external problems when they're really just internal problems. The reason why I think we're relatively successful at doing what we do is I spent a lot of time thinking and analyzing our show. How do I need to change? What books do I need to read? Who do I need to study? What do I need to become so that people are interested in us? Now, before we went on air, I said, like, I'm willing to sing songs and to dance because I can't do either. If that's what it takes. I don't just look at it like, okay, I'm good at this. I'm going to just do more of that and hope that it will change. Mm-hmm. So I'm willing to do this. So I spend an inordinate amount of time studying successful people. So this is what Jim Rohn says, success leaves clues. The thing is, you just need to be willing to look for them. So I study the way that people talk. I remember when I was at Epicurrence at Yosemite, somebody had asked me kind of an impromptu question, and I gave a really bad answer. They asked, so who are you studying? Who are your mentors now? And I gave some lame answers, and my wife's like, she hits me later. It's like, why didn't you say this? You tell me this all the time. I was caught off guard, honey. I wasn't thinking. And really, I study comedians.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I watched their stage presence, and I'm not very different than either of you guys in that I'm extremely introverted too, but I've had to change.
Do you put on a role, like almost like it's you're acting almost? Because me as a person in the DJ booth, I'm me. I'm here. I'm doing my thing. But when I have to get on a mic for if I'm doing a wedding or something, I'm announcing the bride and groom. I'm a completely different person, and I don't know if it's just I'm playing a part, or if I'm that's me and I'm just a quiet, reserved person and I'm coming out. It's weird to me just psychologically to think about how I can be this guy over here and this guy over here. And in this podcast setting, I'm totally fine talking. I have no problem talking to you. But if I go up to three people at Starbucks, headphones on, I'm not talking to anyone.
Right. I want to address this because I think I've worked through some of this and I have some theories on all this stuff. Okay. Let's first start with this idea that somebody's listening to this and it's like, so Mike is one person here, here, and here. So who is Mike? And is he just wearing a lot of masks to show the world? And isn't that being disingenuous and inauthentic? And it might seem like that on the surface. But here's what I think. Mike and Ryan, you guys are complex people. You have many facets to yourselves, right? And you choose to show a different face to the world. For example, you have kids. Mm-hmm. So you're going to put on the dad face. And you have a wife, so you put on the husband face. And sometimes you're a teacher, sometimes you're a podcaster, sometimes you're the boss. And you have to be able to maintain and control different parts of energy. You're not most likely going to talk to your kids like you do to your clients. And you're definitely not going to talk to your clients like the way you talk to your kids. Right. So those are all you. So I have this theory that, we as human beings have so many different parts of us. We're like this brilliant white light. But when you filter the light through a prism, you can actually see it diffracted and see the red, the yellow, orange, green, and blue. You get to decide every single day.
Who gets to see what?
See what shades. And maybe when you're most you're able to open it all up. And that's probably to the people that you trust the most. Sometimes it's not even your life partner. It could just be 3 friends that you grew up as kids. And I know this about myself. So when I was around my cousins, and I had many of them, we would goof and be loud and just crazy. And we'd have so much fun. We'd goof on each other, but we knew it was safe and nobody was going to judge us. Well, when I'd go to school, I'd just clam right up. I was worried that people were going to think something of me. I didn't want to be perceived as, because it would take too much of us understanding each other for me to release my full self.
Yeah.
So what's happening is this. If you watch the trajectory of our show and who I've become, and people are like, you've changed so much. And I think I actually haven't changed at all. What I've done is I've shown you more of me. I'm getting more comfortable seeing people in public and saying, you know what? I'm going to assume we like each other or not. I'm just going to be me because I don't have time to be somebody else. And the more that I grow, the bigger that circle becomes.
How do you handle small talk? I feel like every conversation I get in with someone, I want to get deep and I want to know them as a person. So when I'm, talking with coworkers or people I see occasionally, most of the time I just, the weather's great, and I don't really connect with people like I should unless I'm doing this, unless I'm having like a podcast or I'm having a good conversation with someone. I don't like just talking for the sake of talking. I feel like I want to get to the root of something every time I'm talking to someone.
Okay, we do need to realize, though, to build rapport with people, we have to do a little bit of that first.
Yeah.
But there's a great talk. It's called Make Big Talk, and you should look that up. There's a TEDx talk about it, and the same woman came to the conclusion that you did. It's like time is short. Why don't we ask bigger questions in life? Like, what got you up this morning? And it's a deck. I have it in the other room, and you can flip through it, and you can pull out a card. It's like, oh, this is a good conversation starter. So versus saying like, "What's up? How's it going? How's the weather?" Whatever it is.
Yeah, because I just get annoyed at those. Like when you have a conversation with someone and they don't talk like real life, like real life scenarios, and it's just the weather conversation, and my eyes fade over and I'm done.
So here's another tip I have for you. If you begin the conversation revealing something that is much deeper about yourself, people will return in kind most of the time. There is such a thing as an overshare, like you don't want to drag out everything. But if you talk in open ways, then people are more likely to do this. And I'll tell you how I do it. So if I want to know about your business and what your goals and your finances are, the first thing I do is I tell you what my business goals are, what my finances are. You get to make that decision if you want to return in kind. And there's this thing of reciprocity that you feel like you got to tell me. And I'll give you an example. When I was going to college, I stayed with a family, and he was a pastor, and he would say, he was like, when I was younger, I had premarital sex, I was using drugs, I was drinking alcohol, all these kinds of things. I just felt so compelled to confess to him in that moment.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. Like, so when people are so vulnerable and willing to say whatever, and you guys mentioned Kieran McLaren, in the Mastermind series, he tells you, I was slow to come to this game, and Chris insisted, and eventually I decided to do it, or I've had failed marriages, or this, and I've had problems. And then what happens? Then now you're relatable, you're real, you're not holding anything back.
Well, one thing that we've kind of been very good about on this podcast is at least I try to be 100% legit. I've failed multiple times, and I see this as a way to kind of help people maybe not make the same mistakes that I made, and by being truthful about it and sharing my actual real life experiences, I feel like, by doing that, I'm hoping that I can help people and hope that they won't go through the same mistakes, and I don't know. I love this platform because I can do that.
Yeah.
And I can talk to people like you, and I can talk to people like Ryan Carson and these guys that have these amazing stories that just, I feel like they need to be shared. Mm-hmm. And it's great. So thank you again.
You're approaching that through the eyes of a person who's genuinely curious about people. If you can practice that in real life, it makes it much, much easier. So you don't have to wait for this format to be able to bring that part of you out.
Yeah.
And I've learned this from lots of people. So one of the things that I love to do is I like to watch people, and I like to study them. I'm studying people all the time. So if somebody is doing something really well, I start to think like, how did they begin that conversation? What are they wearing? What's their body language like? How are they leaning in or leaning out of the conversation? And I make notes all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I like to kind of steal whatever traits or habits or behavior, even if I don't understand the inner workings, and do that. Right?
Yeah.
So you want to be a great conversationalist. So you want to be able to spark a conversation with somebody. And if you're really approaching it like, I'm really curious about you, things happen. And my kids watch me all the time because I'm practicing, because this is not an easy thing to do. We're in Utah, and we're staying at this very nice hotel resort. And most of the people that work there, the wait staff, are like Eastern European. Mm-hmm. And there's a woman comes by and she speaks, and I hear a little accent. And so I ask her about it. It's like, where are you from? I hear a little bit of an accent. And she talks to me. Then she tells me she has a PhD in this and that. And I'm like, oh my God. So and you're amazing. Working here?
Yeah.
Right? And she's like, yeah, because there's no job opportunities. There are none at home. And I asked her, like, are there a bunch of other people from your country? And like, yes. And this is how we do it. And they went on campus and interviewed. And I got to learn so much about her. So much so that my wife started getting concerned that she was going to get fired because she spent a lot of time talking to us.
Wow.
And she kept looking over her shoulder. And I said, if you have to go, please don't. I don't want you to get in trouble. And she goes, no, I just want to make sure that that person's getting enough water. That's all I was doing. I'm not going to get in trouble for talking to you.
Huh.
So that's it. So if you see somebody in front of you in line or anywhere, practice the art of having a great conversation with people. Approach it from the point of view that I'm curious about you and just want to be a great listener. It'll make you doing this job much easier, and it'll build a new version of you.
I love that. That's awesome.
Well, and I think that's the moral of the story, right? Is continued education, evolution, becoming, bigger and better versions. Do you think, or I guess maybe this is a better way to say it, do you think that a lot of this has come to you with age, and part of it is just sort of experiencing life? Like, as you've gotten older, did you become a better goal setter and become more introspective and become more curious? And I mean, obviously you've evolved from one stage to another over the course of your career, but like, how much of it do you attribute just to being older and just hitting that amount of life experience? Like, is it relatable to a 26-year-old? Maybe part of this conversation.
I think it is, and I'm trying to be clear and objective about how to answer that question. But I remember when I was going to Art Center, most people were just studying design and stuff, and that's cool. But when I went into typography class, I wanted to learn from all the masters of typography. So one of the beautiful things about Art Center is this incredible library that they have. So of course my friends were out partying and doing whatever it is that they do. I was in the library until it closed. I was just literally walking from aisle to aisle, just pull one book down, and I memorized where all the books were. It's like, if you need to know something, I know where they are because I've looked at most of the books at this point in time. Mm-hmm. So that curiosity is like, I want to go deep because this is exciting to me. Or I would take classes that were outside of my major, illustration classes, figure drawing, painting. I was terrible. I was stressed out in those classes because everybody was so good, but that's what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So I was learning how to use 3D programs when the technology wasn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing that I've noticed, when I went through high school, I didn't get good grades. I didn't apply myself. I wasn't interested in it. But when I went back to college for audio engineering, I got 4.0s. I mean, I did everything I want. I was taking extra classes. I was working with one-on-one with teachers. I'd pay extra to just get tutors and mentorships, and I learned everything I could. I just ate it up. But when I was going, taking an English class in high school, I was sleeping in the back and doing the bare minimum. With the Futur, we haven't even really talked about it that much other than the initial portion of it. That platform to me seems really cool because someone like me who might want to learn Illustrator or might want to learn typography can go and just take a class specifically on that and learn the fine details of that topic. And I think it's really neat that, like some of the other platforms out there, it's, X amount of dollars a month, but you have information overload. And I like how you split it up into categories. Like if you want to learn this, you want to learn business, you want to learn this, sign up for this class, pay this amount, and you have it. And I just want to applaud you on that. I think it's a really nice platform and a good approach.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And there are different business models, obviously, that appeal to different people. We're probably not as smart as some because if you build a subscription-based model, which is what Skillshare and a lot of these companies are, it's an all-you-can-eat kind of buffet.
Yeah.
But what happens is I've noticed myself psychologically, because I paid one flat fee and it's relatively low, I'm not that invested in learning the material.
Yeah.
Whereas if I stop subscribing, then I lose the material, so I just stay subscribed. So
it's
a good business model,
a month,
right?
Or whatever, and you just it's part of your expense.
Yeah. Whereas our model is like you buy it once, you keep it for life, and you only buy it because you want to learn that thing, and there's no real incentive for you to buy 35 classes and then not watch a single one.
Well, one thing that I've been studying recently is web development. And I was, on Lynda and a few other platforms out there. And I would go and I would want to take a class, but I wouldn't know what I needed to study. I didn't know what class I needed to learn first, what topic I wanted to, it was such a broad topic and such a big thing that I spent a lot of time learning stuff that I didn't really need to learn. And I think that had I come across some other things later. When I first started, I'd be a lot further along right now, just because I wouldn't be spinning my wheels learning something I didn't necessarily need to learn. And so that's kind of why I like your approach. Is everything you need is right there. And unfortunately, I haven't signed up for one of your classes, so I don't know exactly how they work.
They're amazing.
But just looking over, your curriculum on your website, it looks really well done, and I do want to sign up for it. I'm not in the design aspect of things, so it doesn't really apply to me as much, but the business ones, I would love to.
Well, and so maybe this is a good point to segue and talk a little bit about the future. So we sort of alluded to earlier, and people who've listened to the show have heard me talk agency and stuff like that. And we talked about how maybe that landscape is changing a little bit from the traditional model where you've got 500 employees and these, $100 million accounts and all this stuff. And now maybe people are starting to focus in a little bit more or go after one expert in a field versus hiring an agency. I wondered two things. First, if you could talk about like being a generalist versus being a specialist. Do you become the world's best JavaScript guy versus a guy that can build, full stack? Or do you like the idea of being, I guess, more of a jack of all trades, in that world? And then second of all, where do you see sort of the business of design or agency culture going? Or what does it look like in the future? And then let's segue into how Futur is sort of the solution or the answer for all that.
Great. So each one of those things can warrant a pretty lengthy answer. So let me tackle them one at a time.
Sure.
So the first thing is, and then a lot of people want to know, should I specialize? Should I generalize? And what's the market want? And I think it's been pretty clear to me, people who specialize do better. It's easier to market. It's easier to build a reputation as being an expert. It's harder to replace you because you've become an expert and you can command higher dollars. But for creative people, the sound of like specializing seems like you're limiting a lot of things, and it suggests not going narrow but going deep. You want to go deep in specific subjects. So let's just say you've mastered typography or lettering or sound design and production. Let's just say that's what you've mastered. Then you can feel free to add other parts to it. But it's very important from a marketing point of view that you specialize. If you think about all the top companies out there that do a certain thing, you most likely pick a company that does that one thing really well and not a company that does 1,000 different things. Like, do you want to buy food products from a company that makes bleach? I'm not sure, right? And that's Procter & Gamble, right? Those are those companies, and it's a house of brands, and so they have lots of little brands, but that's kind of how that works.
Yeah.
Now, but when it comes to your internal development, I think it's important for you to generalize a little bit, and it's okay. So externally specialize, and internally it's okay for you to be broad and study lots of different things. If I'm looking at myself, like I try to put it out there, I should be known for a certain thing. But internally, I have many things that fascinate me. But unlike most people, I don't just kind of dabble in things. I go really, really deep. So when I got into mixed martial arts, I watched like every UFC. I watched every King of the Cage, every Pride. I studied this. I studied their stats. I would be on the blogs and read things until I said that was enough. And when I'm into fishing, I buy all the books, I read it, and I study it, and I watch the videos, the same thing, and I visit the tackle and supply shop. I'm reading the Field and Streams catalog. I'm just doing outdoor life, field, all that. That's what I'm doing until I'm done with that, and then I move on.
Yeah.
So what happens with a lot of people is they are marketing themselves as a generalist, which is dangerous because there's a lot of competition for that. And when you think
my LinkedIn profile literally says I do a little bit of everything.
You may want to revisit that. Right? But then it's like what people do is they dabble a little bit. That's the problem. They say like, I want a little of this, a little of that. So when it comes to like, hey, I need to know a lot about SEO, it's like, I know just a little bit. And if you scratch the surface, that's the end of their knowing.
So for a guy like me who I have this brilliant idea, I've been spending 3 years learning how to build a website and finish this idea. Is it better for me to kind of save up and just pay someone to do it?
Probably.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Well, we just look at time is the most valuable resource that you have. If you spent 3 years so that you can say,
well, how does someone who's broke, like literally paycheck to paycheck, barely getting by, go hire some dude to build a
Okay.
$50,000 website.
So we have to look at the equation, right?
Yeah.
So we can say like if you have to spend $50,000 and if it takes you 3 years to build a $50,000 product and that's the best use of your time, then you've done it correctly. But if you said to yourself like, what do I need to do to earn more than $50,000 in 3 years, then it's working against you at that point.
Yeah.
So your
See,
time,
I have
you
this
to kind of
constant battle of, do I go get a day job? Do I go drive truck for a few years so I can pay some web developer to do this for me? Or do I just keep doing what I'm doing and just eventually I'll get to the point where A, I built a career out of it, and B, because it's nice because what I'm learning right now is something that I can apply later on and maybe get a job with if the website doesn't take off. So
Right.
I feel like I'm learning a valuable skill, but at the same time, I feel like I'm treading water. Like I'm not I feel like I'm making forward progress, but I don't feel like I'm getting there fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so foreign to me to be doing something like this that I honestly have no clue.
Right.
Well,
I have a very specific response because both you guys have now talked about like little pet projects, things that you want to build. Here's the thing. I'm not sure the approach that you're taking is the best approach. And I'll tell you why. I think it's very important for you to prototype your idea so it looks kind of like what you want, but it has no real functionality.
Yeah.
And then to go onto a place where you can crowdfund it and see if the market wants this thing. You should be prototyping and testing your ideas all the time. Test and validate your idea so that you're not building something that ultimately years later like nobody wants or you've missed the opportunity. Why is that important?
Yeah.
Because you can raise money. You can find out if people are genuinely interested in it, but perhaps the biggest benefit of it is they can contribute ideas to your thing in ways that you hadn't thought about. So they become your unpaid collaborator, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I'll make an analogy for some of you guys to think about, okay? And then I'll ground it in a real world example here. The analogy I was going to make is this, is that sometimes we watch films that have really convoluted plots that leave a lot of open holes or in the storyline itself. And then the internet on forums starts to answer all these things and come up with wonderful theories that I think exceed what the original creators did.
Yeah, because you're never going to get all the millions of people watching it the way that they think about it and their ideas.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think right now film is less of a conversation and more of a it's like just being talked to versus it being a dialogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if they made a film and it kind of kept it loose, showed a certain number of people, and then they went back and changed the film based on what it is that those people had in terms of ideas? Because here's the thing about collective intelligence. It's smarter than any one person.
Yeah.
Right? So that's how Pixar manages their stories. They use a lot of people to communicate what they're thinking about it to make one thing much, much better than if the sole writer director just had their own vision. So you give it some bones. So I think this is where you should probably be doing it like the way that Google does this. So Google decided a long time ago their whole method is this. And I talked to a design director at Google Labs. Is they said that if you look at a pyramid, at the bottom of the pyramid are like analysts, scientists, engineers, accountants, executives, and they decide what it is that they want to make. And it starts to bubble towards the top. And the more it goes towards the top, it touches things that we can actually see. So then it gets into product design, UX design, graphic design, the packaging, the buttons and the menus and interfaces, all that kind of stuff. But most people just see at the top of the pyramid. We don't see the accountants, the engineers, the researchers, right?
The countless hours that it took.
All that kind of stuff. So what they do is they just build the pyramid, the top of the pyramid. They design it and they make it look and appear as if it's working to see if people can get excited. And then if people are excited, an engineer will go in and say, look, I know a technology that can achieve that in a much smaller form factor. And somebody else says, oh, I know how to do this. And I've done some research on this already. And actually it coalesces with what it is that you're doing. This is perfect. So they do it the opposite. They invert the pyramid. They start with what it looks like and how it's going to perform and function. And they don't care about the research and data, because if you can't get excited about that, that's not a product.
Well, and that's actually kind of where I'm at right now, is I have the front end pretty much laid out and functionality is almost there, but like attaching it to a database and getting the actual everything working is where I'm struggling right now. And that's what I've been learning and what I've been studying. And I have a guy that I've been tutoring with. And, I'm glad that you said that, because it's kind of, that's what I've been struggling with, is do I continue learning or do I get the product on the market? And I'm kind of leaning towards getting the product on the market. And now I just need to figure out how to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So back
Question
to-
2.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I don't even remember where we left off, but so we were talking about,
Specialization.
yeah,
Or general.
I think we covered, I think pretty well specialization versus generalization.
Mhm.
So now let's get into just quickly. I mean, I realize a lot of people aren't going to give a damn about the future of the agency business, but it is a pretty drastic shift. And so I think it's interesting, at least to the creative people, to talk about how that business is changing. The sort of the traditional model or the Mad Men model with the huge agency and the hundreds of employees and all this stuff. That seems to be going away in exchange for people who are a little more focused, or smaller teams that handle one task, or sort of special forces groups that maybe you guys can just kill this job for us, or we come to Blind for motion and we come to somebody else for something else, and versus hiring an agency and having a massive retainer and all that stuff.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that as an agency owner, or as I don't know if you guys like to call your place an agency, but as sort of somebody in that line of work, how you've seen the landscape change and where you think it's going.
The first thing is, when we're talking about agency, most of, like, the way I think of it is advertising agency, right? So that's usually, and then where is that going? And I think it's been very clear. And when I speak to people who own ad agencies, they tell me advertising's dead.
Yeah.
Because there's lack of accountability, and it's not taking into consideration the changing habits of consumption. We're consuming content on a pool versus being pushed to us, right?
Yep.
So we're looking at things on our mobile phones, and when our lives are interrupted by something, we have great disdain for the company that brought us that disruption.
Every time.
Right? So we know that. I think Vaynerchuk says, Samsung, I hate you now because you keep doing this, and I will never buy another product from you because this is all you do, and we need to change that. So this is going to affect a lot of people, and a lot of money's at stake here, and they're all trying to figure it out. But the people who can deliver value to me, who can entertain me in genuine ways, will build brand affinity with me. So I think the thing about advertising is it needs to move into this place where it entertains and informs us, and that's all it's going to do. So, for example, we have a company that we're close to brokering a deal with. They make a software product that helps us, our people, to manage their projects. So rather than buy media and run a clever ad in the form of a 30-second commercial, what they want to do is hire us to teach people how to manage projects. Manage projects. And by the way, you can use the software to achieve that. So it's very different. And so now they'll pay us to do that.
So it's a learning experience for them.
It's actually going to be a course.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. So the course is for us to teach you project management. We'd normally charge you, say, $50 or $100 for that course. So what this company is going to do is just to do it as a scholarship. We will pay for you to learn.
Huh.
See how the models flip and they're willing to,
and they're
think
excited about it too.
Why not?
Yeah, because it's something they're applying to their business practice. And
well, think about it. Think about this mixer that you bought.
Yeah.
If what they charged you for was the learning thing, and they just shipped you the mixer for free, wouldn't that be fantastic?
It would be amazing. But at the same time, finding out how to use this mixer is hard. There's not a lot of. I'm going into forums on Facebook to figure out how to control a button. You know.
So whatever they spend on marketing, which is probably not a ton, whatever they spend on building a booth at a trade show, which is probably a decent amount of money, they should have spent in hiring somebody who's a really good person and entertaining, who knows how to talk about technology in ways that don't bore people, to teach you how to use this. And then they've done
a fairly decent job. I don't want to talk bad about Midas, but they've done a good job of getting a broad overview. Yeah. But getting the nitty gritty is hard. So,
sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're starting to get close on time, so let's just hit this one last thing real quick. Let's talk about, I guess, the future of the future. So how do you see the future, and maybe its relationship with Blind? Maybe they're fully independent, but it seems like they're sort of linked. How do you see Blind evolving and the future evolving, down the road, if you're willing to get into it?
I'm willing to get into it.
I don't know what the roadmap looks like, but...
The roadmap looks really clear to me. The Futur is an exciting company because first of all, it builds passive income. It's totally scalable. So in every definition of the word, it is a startup, and it's a profitable startup. And I don't take money out of it, but it is a profitable startup, and it has the opportunity to surpass what Blind has been working towards for 22 years in 5 years of business. So theoretically, based on our projections, we should probably be doing somewhere between $2 to $3 million of revenue this year. And we've been growing at 300%
Wow.
year over year.
Wow.
So it's going bananas, right?
Yeah.
So every year that we've been in business, we've grown by about 300% every year. Now, that doesn't mean anything because in the beginning, we barely made 2 nickels.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But the numbers look very promising. We just had our 4th of July promotion and we made more. We broke all kinds of sales records, right? And it was wonderful.
Do you have a sales team here?
It's Ben Burns,
Okay.
and a handful of interns, right?
Yeah.
That's our sales team. But we're smashing through that. So it's like for me, being a service provider, a service company as blind as an agency or design studio is less interesting to me because the future is kind of what you want, which is you want creative freedom and you want to be able to make a certain amount of money to provide for you and your family. And the future is going to do that for us. So in theory, then next year we should probably hit somewhere between $6 to $9 million, which if we hit those numbers will be more than Blind has ever made in a single year.
Right.
Wow.
And this is sustainable and it's like, it's predictable. The growth is there. And what's happening more than the money and all this kind of other stuff, the money just makes the dream possible. But it's like, I can go to Taiwan and announce it 10 days before I go to Taiwan who wants to do a workshop, and 2 independent people organize workshops and I get paid to do those workshops.
Well, you announced on, I think it was on Facebook, that you're going to the Philippines, and there was 500 comments below it like, hey, talk about this, come here.
Or Australia
go to
recently.
Cebu. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's amazing.
That's really cool. That means that goal of hitting or impacting 1 billion lives on planet Earth may be not that far away.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I feel like it's cheating though to do this in Asia. There's just too many people over there. So I mean, try and make that billion work over here. Let's see how you do it.
How many people are in the U.S.? That would be like everybody.
Yeah. No, but that's a pretty good goal if you could get everyone in the States.
But so here's the cool thing is sometime in my life I will expire, meaning I will pass away, right?
Yeah, but your media and your content won't.
That's right.
And something like the future is neat to me because it's always out there. And that's what's cool about this podcast too, is the people that we talk to and the experiences that we get to share are forever out there. And it just means a lot. And you're going to be continually affecting people's lives long after you're here. And not even just with, the future, but with your art, with the commercials, with what you put out, you inspire people. And it's really a neat thing.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Before we go, I want to leave everybody with this one message, right? Which is to have a bag, BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And I want to tell you why. So in my mind, I'm thinking there's somebody out there who's speaking, who's getting paid $30,000 to speak. And that person's a designer. Why can't that person be me? Mm-hmm. So years ago, I set a goal in my mind that this is what I want to be able to do. And I didn't run away from this, but I want to be realistic too. Who's going to pay me $30,000 to speak? And the reason why this person gets paid so much is they're well known and they can put butts in seats. So whoever the event organizer is, they're going to make their money back.
Yeah.
So then you have to start to reverse engineer this, right? So you say, well, how can I be influential enough and to be well known enough to be able to move the needle for an event organizer? So you see, then I was like, well, what do I need to learn? So your one of your questions was, does being who you are come with maturity and with age and experience? And to a degree it does. But I said, you don't need to be old to be able to do this, but I now am reading more books than I've ever read in the previous 30 years of my life. Just in the last couple of years, because I know that I can't command that kind of money by going on stage and relying on old things that I know. I need to know things that are relevant and helpful to people. So typically what happens is I agree to give a talk. I read the books that are necessary to supplement what I don't know moments before I do that talk, and then I lecture from what I just learned. And it's a great motivational thing for me because I don't want to just read a book just to read a book like you. I don't want to learn a tool or a technique because I don't know how to apply it. So I have massive amounts of books at home and I just go through them like, this is the one I need to read, I think, for this talk. And I skim it and I'm like, yes. So I start reading and I start highlighting it. So when I had to do a lecture on story, I read Donald Miller's book on creating a brand story to supplement everything else that I knew. Mm-hmm. And so this is how my life is. So when I want to challenge you guys and everybody that's listening to this, think about your goal, think about the finances you need to make, and think about how you can achieve that. But allow yourself to open it up that you need to change to achieve that goal. Really boring if you stay the same person.
Sure.
That's it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, we're just a little over time, so we'll let you out of here. Everybody check out our guest, Christo, at blind.com. Which, by the way, I mean, that's a great domain.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that, the vision impaired people of the world have been chasing you down for years for that one. But that's a really great domain. And then thefutur.com, and that's future, Futur. So check out Chris in those spots and all points around the internet. He's on every other podcast and everything. He's
Pretty
all over
much
the place.
just Google
and
he'll
follow
pop
them
up.
on YouTube. It's a lot of fun. So with that, thanks so much, Chris. Really value your time. Appreciate you so much. And thanks for going along with us, man. We really appreciate it.
That was awesome.
And with that, everybody have an awesome week, and we'll see you next time.